West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Now, as Lawrence O'Donnell just mentioned, today was the first time that we've heard from the defense. We've heard from the prosecution, in effect, with the indictment, with the announcement of charges that led to today's proceedings. But this is the first time we got to see the defense go through their paces. For the defense counsel for former President Trump, we did get a sense in their opening statements today about how it looks like they're going to try to defend their client. If today's opening statements are any guide, they're going to stress that Mr. Trump is a former president, and they're going to always call him President Trump. They're going to stress beyond that he right now is the presumptive Republican nominee for president again, or, as his defense counsel called him today, the Republican nominee, not even presumptive. They're going to claim that every aspect of this was an innocent act by Trump, that there wasn't an underlying sexual encounter to cover up, even though that would seem to be immaterial to the charges. They will seem to be claiming, again, if today's opening statements are any guide, that Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, paid a porn star on his own accord and for his own reasons, that Trump only paid Michael Cohen for legal services just like he always had. He just changed to a weird new way of paying him after the porn star thing because, well, they'll think of something. But if you were in this defense team, if you were in charge of coming up with a defense for Mr. Trump, here's the part of the prosecution's case that would seem to be the most difficult thing to explain logically. If you're really going to try to mount a defense that Trump did nothing at all wrong, that there was no conspiracy to corrupt the election, as the prosecution put it at the top of their opening statements today, well, this would seem to be the toughest thing logically that you're up against. Here it is. This is from the opening statement from prosecutor Matthew Colangelo. Quote, now at this, this is not quoting it. Forgive me, this is the introduction. At this point, Colangelo has explained to the jury that there was what he called a criminal conspiracy between Trump and AMI, American Media, to publish positive stories about Trump, to publish negative stories about Trump's rivals, to find negative stories about Trump that hadn't been published yet, and then to pay the sources of those stories to make them shut up and not tell anybody about those stories before the election. So the prosecution has explained to the jury at this point that AMI, American Media, National Enquirer, they first found a doorman named Dino Sajudin, who said that Trump had fathered a secret child with a housekeeper. Sajudin was the first one that AMI paid to keep quiet about his story. Then there was a second one, a woman named Karen McDougal, who said she had an affair with Trump. They paid her to not tell anybody about that story as well. Then there was the third one, Stormy Daniels. And although by this point the Enquirer was still willing to make arrangements for her to be paid to be quiet about that story, by that point they were not ready to put up additional money. And so Michael Cohen put up the money for that. So the prosecutors explained all this to the jury, and then he says this, prosecutor Matthew Colangelo, quote, Cohen made that payment at Donald Trump's direction and for his benefit. And he did it with a specific goal of influencing the outcome of the election. Now look, no politician wants bad press. But the evidence at trial will show that this was not spin or communication strategy. This was a planned, coordinated, long-running conspiracy to influence the 2016 election, to help Donald Trump get elected through illegal expenditures, to silence people who had something bad to say about his behavior, using doctored corporate records and bank forms to conceal those payments along the way. It was election fraud, pure and simple. We will never know, and it doesn't matter if this conspiracy was the difference maker in a close election. But you will see evidence in the defendant's own words from his social media posts, from the speeches at campaign rallies and other events. You will see in his own words making crystal clear that he was certainly concerned about how all of this could hurt his standing with voters and with female voters in particular. You will also see evidence that on election night, as news outlets got closer to calling the election for Donald Trump, the lawyer for both Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal texted Dylan Howard, an editor at the National Enquirer, and he said, quote, "What have we done?" And about a month after the election, David Pecker, the CEO of American Media, then authorized AMI to release both Dino Sajudin, the doorman, and Karen McDougal from their non-disclosure agreements. Say that again. About a month after the election, Pecker authorized AMI to release the first two recipients of catch and kill money, release them from their non-disclosure agreements once the election was over. Colangelo, quote, "So, having paid for the stories in order to keep them from the public before Election Day, Pecker and AMI then told both McDougal and Sajudin a month after the election that they were no longer bound by the non-disclosure agreements." So, just think about what that means. This claim, right, from the defense is that none of these payment schemes had anything to do with the election. Who knows what Michael Cohen was doing paying that porn star? Donald Trump was just paying for legal fees, right? The defense is saying this had nothing to do with the election. The prosecution says they will present evidence that Trump and American media paid for all of these people to be silent until the election was over. And then once the election was over, they then released all these people from these agreements to be silent. Because once the election happened, they didn't care anymore. Because at that point, mission accomplished. Because the mission was to influence the election. And so once the election was done, there's no more need for these agreements. The mission was the election. The mission was not to protect his brand. The mission wasn't to save his family embarrassment. It was to keep these people silent, to pay them to be silent, specifically and only in order to win the election, full stop. The prosecution calls this a criminal scheme to corrupt the 2016 presidential election, one that was covered up by lying in these business records. Logically, that whole releasing people from the agreements once the election was over, logically, that would seem to be the crux of this case, if the prosecution can prove it. Legally, though, we'll see. Lawrence?
So, Rachel, here we arrive at the different burdens of prosecution and defense. The prosecution is going for logic, and you are following their logic. And their logic
Guilty.
takes you over to the National Enquirer, and it takes you over to this guy who said, told the Enquirer that, Trump fathered a child, that turns out not to be true. Everyone in the courtroom agrees that that wasn't true. And then it takes you over to Karen McDougal, and those are the two who are released from their confidentiality agreement after the election. And what the defense is going to say in final argument is that has nothing to do with this case, absolutely nothing. Because remember, what the defense needs in final argument is not logic. They're not trying to take you through a flawlessly logical story. They're just trying to tug at any little doubt they can find anywhere. And they will lean in final argument on that agreement in that courtroom that guy who told the Enquirer that Donald Trump illegitimately fathered a child was not telling the truth. Wasn't telling the truth, just like Stormy Daniels wasn't telling the truth about Donald Trump. And Donald Trump gets hustled by these people all the time, and we have to deal with them in different ways. Donald Trump has said publicly, this happens to every man, includes you, Chris Hayes, sitting at this table, every man who's public, every man who's in the public eye is constantly paying off tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these deals all the time. That's Donald Trump's claim, right? And he's going to say, this was happening to me all the time. And all of that McDougal stuff, everything involving Pecker, everything involving the Inquirer is going to be thrown out the door in the final argument of Donald Trump's defense lawyers, because none of that is a charged crime. Not a single thing in any of that. It's these business records. And the other piece of the defense that we heard today about the business records is, this is the name of the woman who made out the checks. This is the name of the bookkeeper, it's entered in the record, who filled out the forms. This is the name of the person who told her to say legal services, and Donald Trump never told any of them to say legal services. That's the defense. Donald Trump didn't tell them to keep the books this way. And the money, oh, by the way, was not for having anything to do with Stormy Daniels. That's the entire defense. There's no other piece of the defense. And it has nothing to do with other people's, non-disclosure agreements and all that stuff. And of course, all of that stuff makes perfect sense when a prosecution is building you this flawless table that has four logical legs to it. Defense is going to come along and say, no, it has no legs. The table has no legs.
Right. We released all these people from these agreements after the election because we love late November. And that's a time when we release everyone from their agreements.
Merry Christmas.
It's a time of
They're
freedom.
going to feel no need. The
The
defense will feel no need to explain at all why those non-disclosure agreements are no longer enforceable. They won't have any need to when they're in their final argument. They'll throw something out there in the course of the trial, but they won't feel compelled to explain.
Well, what you're talking about the claim from Dino the doorman being a false claim, what AMI nevertheless agreed to pay for it, and what Michael Cohen was paid and how they arrived at that amount was the snort your coffee out your nose in the courtroom moment.
It is Tuesday, the 23rd of April of 2024, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is still hobbling, though I should tell you, she goes in to get her staples out on Thursday. But in the interim, we will all be seating you directly for our especially special daily special Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Well, another morning here on the west coast of these great United States. And when I say the west coast, I mean the continental United States. Because there's a lot more of us where we come from. Yeah, you know it. And so it's been quite nice weather here, which means that people feel that it's their right to foul the air by burning their trash. I don't know, people. Give them an inch and they'll put mercury and all sorts of other things in the river because they're trying to find a little speck of gold. Had to stop them doing that and they're still pissed off. How dare you take away our income? Oh, yeah, okay. Tell it to the salmon fishermen. They're just a bunch of Indians. Well, now we know where you come from. Okay, well, we still have a racial problem in these great United States, and it is being used as a campaign issue, and I'm not saying it's from our side. Okay, the protection of equal protection and due process for all somehow has become morphed into an unpatriotic endeavor by those who are trying to destroy the United States. Everything is topsy-turvy. God, I don't know. If I didn't know better, I would think that a lot of people took LSD back in the day, and now in their twilight years, they're kind of, bugging off. I don't know if that's a term, but it'll do. Yep. They're They got little bubbles popping in their brains of memory bubbles. And some of those memory bubbles are hallucinogenic claptrap. Jeez. But I know they didn't do that, so it must be something else. Could it be the water? Why is there so much white resentment in rural America? Well, I recognized as a young child that you live in a small town, no matter how small it is, someone's got to be the big fish. Somebody. Sometimes there's a vying for who the big fish will be, and in their vying, they're going to make sure that all other contenders, pretenders to the crown, are held at bay. And you're just living in a small town. Give me a break. So I figured as a little kid, there's a lot of trucks driving by. I wonder where they're going. It's not here. I want to go where those trucks are going. And by and large, they went to the big city. And I went to the big city, and I found out that in some ways, when you live in your little tenement or wherever, there's always going to be somebody who wants to be the big fish in a tiny little place. Petty tyrants is what I came to know them as. We all did. So, I figured, there's no virtue wherever you live. Oh, I live in the big city, so I'm more virtuous. Do you ever hear people in the big city talk about how virtuous it is to live in the big city over all these other peons out there in flyover country? You never hear it. We would never denigrate all those massive amounts of people living in all that vacant land by just reducing it to flyover country. We would never insult them so. Come on. Well, when you live in flyover country, you know exactly what that means. Because, where are those planes going? Where are those trucks going? Where is everybody else going? They're not coming here. And even if they are, geez. Yeah, I remember it got to the point when I lived in Laguna Beach that the locals bugged out of town in the summertime because it was so crowded. We really loved those foggy mornings that kept the tourists away. And by tourists, sometimes that meant like Laguna Beach is on the coast. That might be people like, in Garden Grove. And that's over by Huntington Beach, inland just a little bit. Tourists from Garden Grove coming to our little enclave of, whatever. Laguna Beach back in the day was quite different than it is now. It's not it was still pretty ritzy, let's be clear. But after so many fires, people do these things. They build their little mega mansions or their giant mega mansions on the same footprint because that's what they're allowed. The same footprint as the property previous. But now it's turned into, multi-story living on stilts in many cases. And is that a good thing to do on a hillside in Southern California on the coast? There ought to be a law. Well, we have many people who feel that they should be able to do whatever they want to do because it's their land. I always say, don't pee in the stream. There's some people living downstream from you. And if somebody says, I don't care, well, then you have to have some sort of agreement with the community to approach this person and convince them in some fashion that peeing in the stream is a wrong thing and they ought to stop. And if they continue, well, you got the community. Like I said, doesn't matter where you are or where you come from, there's always some sort of petty dictator, petty tyrant, telling you not to pee in the stream. Darn it. Freedom to pee in the stream. Remember the good old days. I always wanted to be a clean hippie, didn't you? Always wanted to be a clean punk also. Dirty hippie. And I know why people call some people dirty hippies, because let me tell you a little secret about, well, independent living off the grid. Before all of the docks in Sausalito were, pretty much forced to tie into city services, like electricity, sewage. Sewage is a really big one. Where did people put their sewage before they were tied into city services? Yes, it went into the bay. Sausalito. Everybody looks at Sausalito as being, so Mediterranean. Do they throw their poop in their waters? I don't know. They like to fish there, and, having all that fecal matter is not a good deal. It's not a good thing. I'm just saying. Just saying. And what was the excuse outside of, well, look at all the fish pooping in the water all the time. It hasn't done anything because they're pooping. Why do you blame us for all of the ills of this having been in the earth? What about all those fish pooping? Well, I don't know. I think we still probably take the cake when it comes to what we can excrete from our bodies that can destroy the earth. Proven time and again. And the other excuse is that the bay flushed twice a day. Now that takes some maritime skills to understand what that means, doesn't it? Oh my God. It's going somewhere else, so it must be good. And that's why we have society. To stop that kind of thinking, because it really hurts the rest of us, doesn't it? 70 miles of open bay, 70 miles of poop. We don't want that. So I don't know how we got to this poop thing, but maybe it's because Trump is in court today. And oh my God, that guy has brought us so low. The President of the United States. Putin is laughing. I finally got the Americans where I don't know. What are you going to try to do, Vlad? I dare you. We all dare you. Okay. Well, I suppose I could rant more about the brainwashing of America. But I'll let our stories tell the story itself in some ways. Counter and just reporting the facts, ma'am. So why don't I, in my roundabout way, tell you what we have in store for you in the curated part of this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We, royal we? No, there's some other people involved. Don't worry. Well, yes. A key twist in Trump's catch and kill scheme will be hard for him to explain away. But Trump doesn't explain stuff. He tells people. In his whiny little explaining way of his. Singular. Poor little rich boy put out by all the pressures of the world. We treat him so bad. On the rest of the menu... Hey, Minnesota and other Democratic-led states are marshaling the pushback on censorship by banning the book ban. Good. You ban books, we're going to ban the book ban. We, then, are considered the real dictators. You just watch. Seattle Children's Hospital won't turn over gender-affirming care records in a lawsuit settlement with Texas. Yeah, they had to sue Paxton. And he was coming after the kids in other states. Well, not anymore. And the Baltimore mayor and city council filed suit that the owner and manager of the massive container ship that took down the Francis Scott Key Bridge should be held fully liable for the deadly collapse. Fully. Well, I don't know. To me, that's obvious, but it has to be stated, it has to be codified, and it's going to be adjudicated as such too, as well it should. After the break, we move to the chef's table where UK prosecutors charged 2 men with spying for China, including a parliamentary researcher. And Elon Musk accused Australia of censorship after a Sydney court banned the violent video of a bishop being stabbed. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Going to forego the usuals as we usually do now, and except to remind you that go to our chat room link at our homepage, and Kelly Lincoln takes care of that. Become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio because it really helps us out. Follow Netroots Radio on social media at Netroots Radio, and we thank Tom for that. Follow me at Justice Putnam for those show notes and links diaries, and pick up podcasts everywhere. All right. Let us tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, by the way, a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian and paprika will make all the difference in the world. And some people don't want you to know about it. I wonder why. Steve Karnowski and Mike Catalini bring us this first offering here, and they are out of the Associated Press. Minnesota is one of several Democratic-leaning states where lawmakers are now pursuing bans on book bans. The Washington and Maryland legislatures have already passed them this year, while Illinois did so last year. It was a major flashpoint of Oregon's short session where legislation passed the Senate but died without a House vote. I got to tell you, this is one of those, shall we say, flashpoints by the usual suspects here in our little burg of Rogue River who are anti-public education and therefore anti-government, representative government, democratic representative government, especially that. Well, according to the American Library Association, over 4,200 works in school and public libraries were targeted in 2023. I should add that that's only by a small number of people. When I say a small number of people, I mean less than a half dozen. But that was a jump from the old record of nearly 2,600 book bans in 2022. Many challenged books, 47% in 2023, had LGBTQ plus and racial themes. Restrictions in some states have increased so much that librarians and administrators fear crippling lawsuits, hefty fines, and even imprisonment if they provide books that others regard as inappropriate. Look what they've done to our medical system. Already this year, lawmakers in more than 15 states have introduced bills to impose harsh penalties on libraries or librarians. They'll never keep them quiet again. They just didn't want to keep quiet in the library, and now they're getting back on the get back. Conservative parents and activists argue that the books are too sexually explicit or otherwise controversial and are inappropriate, especially for younger readers. Yeah, wait until those kids find out what sexual abuse is. They won't want it happening anymore, will they? National groups such as Moms for Liberty say parents are entitled to more control over books available to their children. Yeah, you don't want those kids to know what sexual abuse is. What they don't know won't hurt them, right? I don't know. They're just like putting up a big red flag saying, look at me. Look at me, Law and Order SUV. Why won't they? But pushback is emerging, thank God. According to Every Library, a political action committee for libraries, several states are considering varying degrees of prohibitions on book bans. A sampling includes California, Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, Kansas, Massachusetts, Missouri, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Vermont, though in some conservative states appear unlikely to pass. One has also died in New Mexico this year. One such bill was awaiting Democratic Governor Wes Moore's signature in Maryland. Washington Governor Jay Inslee signed a bill last month that sets a high bar for removing challenged materials, especially those dealing with race, sexual orientation, and gender identity. A version pending in New Jersey would protect librarians from civil or criminal liability. Who does that? Is this like 1928 in, I don't know, Munich? The Bavarian forest? Some little burg back deep in the Bavarian forest. We don't like the sexual material in these books. Oh, really? I wonder why. Stengel of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is dropping a request for a Seattle hospital to hand over records regarding gender-affirming treatment potentially given to children from Texas as part of a lawsuit settlement that was announced yesterday, Monday. Seattle Children's Hospital filed a lawsuit against Paxton's office in December in response to the Republican appearing to go beyond state borders to investigate transgender health care. Appeared. Paxton, a staunch conservative who I should add is still under federal indictment for securities fraud, has helped to drive GOP efforts that target the rights of trans people and has sent similar letters to Texas hospitals last year. The Seattle hospital said in a statement that it had successfully fought the overreaching demands to obtain confidential patient information. Too bad, what hospital was that on the East Coast that gave it up? I think it was Vanderbilt, wasn't it? A judge in Austin dismissed the lawsuit on Friday, saying the parties had settled their dispute. Now, Texas is among the states that have enacted laws restricting or banning gender-affirming medical care for transgender minors. The hospital's lawsuit included a copy of the letter from Paxton's office, which, among other requests, asked the hospital to produce records identifying medication given to children who live in Texas, the number of Texas children who receive treatment, and documents that identified the standard protocol or guidance used for treatment. As part of the settlement, according to court records, I'll spit it out, the parties agreed that Seattle Children's Hospital would withdraw its registration to transact business in Texas. But a hospital spokesperson said in a statement that they don't operate health care facilities or provide gender-affirming care in Texas. In court records, the hospitals had previously stated that it had a limited number of people who work remotely and live in Texas, but that none were involved in gender-affirming care. It also said it did not advertise its services in Texas. When we merely began asking questions, they decided to leave the state of Texas and forfeit the opportunity to do business here, Paxton lied in a press release on Monday, in this reporter's opinion. He said Texas will vigorously protect children from gender-affirming treatment that he called damaging, because how else are you going to keep the feds off your ass because you have a felonious securities fraud that's been hanging over your head for 8 years? I have no idea why they haven't acted sooner. The Texas law prevents transgender minors from accessing hormone therapies, puberty blockers, and transition surgeries, even though medical experts say such surgical procedures are rarely performed on children. Well, who cares about a little trifle like that when you're pandering for politics? Us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The owner and manager of a massive container ship that took down the Francis Scott Key Bridge last month should be held fully liable for the deadly collapse, according to court papers filed yesterday on Monday on behalf of Baltimore's mayor and city council. The two companies filed a petition soon after the March 26 collapse, asking a court to cap their liability under a pre-Civil War provision of an 1851 maritime law, a routine but important procedure for such cases. A federal court in Maryland will ultimately decide who is responsible and how much they owe and what could become one of the most expensive maritime disasters in history. Singapore-based Grace Ocean Private Ltd. owns the Dolly, the vessel that veered off course and slammed into the bridge. Synergy Marine Pte. Limited, also based in Singapore, is the ship's manager. In their filing yesterday, Monday, attorneys for the city accused them of negligence, arguing the company should have realized the Dolly was unfit for its voyage and manned the ship with a competent crew, among other issues. A spokesperson for the company said Monday that it would be inappropriate to comment on the pending litigation. The ship was headed to Sri Lanka when it lost power shortly after leaving Baltimore and struck one of the bridge's support columns, collapsing the span and sending 6 members of a roadwork crew plunging to their deaths. FBI agents boarded the stalled ship last week amid a criminal investigation. A separate federal probe by the NTSB will include an inquiry into whether the ship experienced power issues before starting its voyage. Officials have said that the investigation will focus generally on the Dolly's electrical system. Well, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. From a very young age, we're encouraged to eat fruits and vegetables. Unfortunately, many Americans are not getting the message. Dr. Seung-Hee Lee Kwan is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. She's joining us today to discuss the importance of eating enough fruits and vegetables. Welcome to the show, Seung-Hee.
Thank you for having me.
Seung-Hee, what is the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables?
The federal guidelines recommend that adults consume at least 1.5 cups to 2 cups of fruit and 2 to 3 cups of vegetables each day. This is for adults who get less than 30 minutes of physical activity a day. Adults who are more physically active need more calories and thus should be eating more fruits and vegetables. 1 cup is about 12 strawberries or 1 large tomato.
How many people consume the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables?
We found that very few adults are getting enough fruits and vegetables. Just 12% are eating the recommended amount of fruits, and less than 1 in 10 eat enough vegetables. And consumption is lower among men, young adults, and adults living in poverty.
Why is eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables so important?
Eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables can help with 3 things. 1, it can reduce the risk of many leading causes of illness and deaths, such as heart disease, type 2 diabetes, some cancers, and even obesity. It can also add important nutrients that are commonly missing in Americans' diet. And it can help with weight management if adults consume fruits and vegetables instead of other calorie-dense foods.
How can we meet the recommended daily intake of fruits and vegetables?
Try to fill half of your plate with fruits or vegetables at each meal or every eating occasion. Making fruits and vegetables the focal point of your meal will help you meet your recommendations. For example, recent studies have shown that adults get most of their fruit during breakfast and snacks. So you can try adding berries to your morning oatmeal or grab a piece of fresh fruit as an afternoon snack. For vegetables, most adults eat them at dinner, so try adding more into your lunch by adding a side salad or packing a snack of baby carrots or grape tomatoes.
Are canned or frozen products just as good as fresh?
All forms of fruits and vegetables count towards meeting the recommendations. For the most health benefits, make sure that the fruits and vegetables you consume have a limited amount of salt, butter, sugar, or creamy sauces. When selecting canned fruits, choose the ones with lowest sugars. And for canned or frozen vegetables, choose those lower in sodium.
Where can listeners get more information about eating a healthy diet?
Listeners can go to cdc.gov/nutrition or choosemyplate.gov.
Thanks, Seung-Hee. I've been talking today with Seung-Hee Lee Kwan about the importance of eating a healthy diet. Eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables can help reduce the risk of many leading causes of illness and death and add important nutrients to your diet. Make sure you're eating enough. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution, and you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Here's how the voting system works, or doesn't. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In November 2026, Crystal Mason, thinking she was doing her civic duty, went to the polls to cast her vote. But her name was not on the voting roll, so Ms. Mason did what typically happens. She cast a provisional ballot. It turns out that Ms. Mason was not eligible to cast a real ballot because she was on federal supervised release. That's not a voting disqualification in many states, but it is in Texas, where she and her 3 children lived. Everyone agrees Ms. Mason didn't know that. But Texas prosecutors didn't care at all. They maintained lack of criminal intent was irrelevant. All that matters was that she illegally cast a provisional ballot, and she was convicted of voter fraud and sentenced to 5 years. 5 years for casting a provisional ballot that was never counted. Finally, in April 2024, a Texas court rejected that theory and acquitted her. So, all's well that ends well? Not really. First, Ms. Mason had to live through years and years with a 5-year prison sentence hanging over her head. Second, the case sadly may teach people who have had a brush with the law to not risk trying to register and vote. The stakes are too high. That's wrong, but fortunately, Ms. Mason has taught us another lesson about fortitude and the importance of fighting for your rights. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. We're in Wisconsin today, where Governor Tony Evers signed on to a state Supreme Court case to restore drop boxes, and disability and democracy groups are pushing to allow electronic ballots for disabled citizens. The pre-August 2023 Wisconsin Supreme Court banned most ballot drop boxes and required that absentee ballots could only be returned physically by the voter, not by others. In March 2024, the current Wisconsin Supreme Court agreed to reconsider the case, brought by a voter, Priorities USA, and the Wisconsin Alliance of Retired Americans. April 19th, Governor Tony Evers' request to be an intervener in the case was accepted, and oral arguments are scheduled for May 13th. A district court case filed April 16th by Disability Rights Wisconsin and the League of Women Voters asks the court to compel the Wisconsin Election Board to allow disabled voters to vote absentee electronically. The Wisconsin Examiner reports that the state has no accommodation for blind and low vision voters that doesn't require assistance, violating ballot secrecy. 12 states allow the disabled to vote electronically, and 33 allow electronic ballots for overseas and military voters, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures. The case will likely be heard later this year. We have more on these cases at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal. Find us on Facebook at American Democracy Minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day 1,800 auto workers sat down at the Ford Motor Plant in Richmond, California. It was the largest Ford plant on the West Coast. The UAW organizing drive at Ford had just begun a few weeks earlier with a sit-down strike in Kansas City. Company manager Clarence Bullwinkle reported he had returned from lunch only to find the plant occupied and all the power shut off. Workers began their occupation after 12 workers with seniority rights had been transferred from the assembly plant to the loading department and then discharged. Strikers voted to allow company officials and office workers to leave the plant but not return. Bullwinkle was told to get out and stay out until you meet our demands. he refused to budge and holed up in his office. Demands included recognition of the union, seniority rights, and regular pay instead of discharge for workers who are out sick or injured on duty. As the night shift arrived and then left, they passed their lunch buckets in solidarity to the striking workers. Within 12 hours, the strike was reportedly called off after Ford officials agreed to meet with strikers. Seeing this as tantamount to winning union recognition, workers paraded through the streets in the early hours of Saturday morning. But they hit the picket lines later that day when Ford officials failed to appear. By Monday, they were right back on the job. Fearing another day's loss of production, Ford officials met with union leaders. While workers did not win formal recognition, they did win seniority rights and recognition of the Shop Stewards Committee in a first step toward union recognition, which would come 4 years later.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 55 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs around 80. Mainly sunny to start, then a few afternoon clouds. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Some passing clouds overnight with lows in the mid to upper 40s. Winds out of the west, northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Then intervals of clouds and sunshine in the morning tomorrow with more clouds later in the day. Highs in the low 70s. Winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And it looks like we have rain in the offing on Thursday, Friday, and maybe Saturday. Grass pollen is rated high here in our little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 23 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is rated high at level 7. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.9 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 83%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 50 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 54 and sunny. Rome is 58 and mostly cloudy with a wind advisory. Bagram is 58 and clear. Hong Kong is 68 and cloudy. Tokyo is 61 degrees and cloudy. Oh my. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 51 degrees with heavy rain showers. San Francisco, California is 56 degrees and cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 56 and mostly cloudy. And New York, New York is 58 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Sylvia Way of the Associated Press World Desk brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder, Tuesdays. A former researcher working in the UK Parliament and another man have been charged with spying for China. Police said Christopher Cash, age 29, and Christopher Berry, age 32, were charged with providing prejudicial information to a foreign state, China. They will appear at Westminster Magistrates Court on Friday. Police allege the two men collected, recorded, or communicated information prejudicial to the safety or interests of the state and violated the Official Secrets Act between late 2021 and February of 2023. This has been an extremely complex investigation into what are very serious allegations, said Dominic Murphy, head of the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Command, in a very light British accent. Authorities did not release details about the two men, but Berry is reportedly an academic based in Oxfordshire, and the Sunday Times reported last year that Cash was a parliamentary researcher who worked with senior lawmakers from the governing Conservatives. Cash's colleagues included Alicia Kearns, who now heads the powerful Foreign Affairs Committee, and her predecessor in that role, Tom Tugendhat, who is now Security Minister. House of Commons Speaker Lindsay Hoyle confirmed yesterday, Monday, that one of the suspects was a parliamentary pass holder at the time of the alleged offenses. British Prime Minister Sunak said last year that he raised the issue with Chinese Premier Li Qing, saying he voiced very strong concerns about interference in British democracy. At the time, Cash issued a statement through his lawyers maintaining his innocence. Also on Monday, 3 people were arrested in Germany on suspicion of spying for China and arranging to transfer information on technology with potential military uses. British intelligence authorities have ratcheted up their warnings about Beijing's covert activities in recent years. In 2022, the head of the MI5 Domestic Intelligence Agency, Ken McCallum, named China, Russia, and Iran as the leading security threats to the UK. And I would say the U.S. as well. He said that Chinese authorities' attempts to shape British politics included targeting and influencing a range of people in politics, including those early in their political careers. Sounds very familiar now, doesn't it? Rod McGurk of the Associated Press World Desk brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tech billionaire Elon Musk accused Australia of censorship after an Australian judge ruled that his social media platform must block users worldwide from accessing video of a bishop being stabbed in a Sydney church. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese responded today by describing Musk as an arrogant billionaire who considered himself above the law and was out of touch with the public. X Corp, The tech company, rebranded in 2023 by Musk after he bought Twitter, announced last week it would fight in court Australian orders to take down posts relating to a knife attack on Bishop Marmari Emanuel in the Assyrian Orthodox Church as a service was being streamed online on April 15th. The material was geo-blocked from Australia but available elsewhere. Albanese berated Musk in several television interviews. "We'll do what's necessary to take on this arrogant billionaire who thinks he's above the law, but also above common decency," Albanese told Australian Public Broadcasting. "The idea that someone would go to court for the right to put up violent content on a platform shows how out of touch Mr. Musk is. Social media needs to have social responsibility with it. This is a bloke who's chosen ego and showing violence over common sense. This is not about censorship," Albanese said. "It's about common sense and common decency. And Elon Musk should show some." Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesday. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin l'âge tombe, nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte coeur. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, l'âge tombe, nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.